I just wanted to say one correction. You said a lot of stakeholders decided to change from Ontario to, it was one stakeholder, Michael Roche, who made the decision. And I need to recognize him for the vision to go ahead with this and carry it through. Oops, I hit the wrong button too. Just a bit of background that the stakeholders were actually a lot of people who got together in an OHCOW meeting, and we were trying to struggle with how do we support change in the workplace, creating tools that will help people who want to make the workplace better. And when they sat together and we discussed a number of topics, this topic was the one that came up most often. Because they said, you know, for ergonomics and for air quality or other issues in the workplace, we have tools, but when our members call us and say we're having problems with stress, there's nothing. We don't have any tools. So that's where this work came out of. It was a need to develop something that people could use to deal with this issue. And we started off with the COPSOQ short version, and this is, you've seen a lot of these already. This is a summary of it. The little blue thing you have in front of you is a new version of it that we've kind of rearranged. Actually, the one you have is different than the one that's here. We're still trying to figure out how to group the different factors together. And Hannah has done a lot of work, some of which she showed earlier with her diagrams and arrows, and we haven't got to the arrow part yet. These were the items that we added. As Peter was saying, the face validation was a process where we tried the survey ourselves and found out which survey, and we liked the COPSOQ the best. But we also went out to conferences and asked people to fill it out and got feedback. And these were all the things that people mentioned that weren't on there. Some of them, the health and symptoms questions were from the COPSOQ, but they weren't in the short version, so we added those also. Peter already went through this, but he talked about this, so I'll just go directly to some of the results. The way I've set this up is at the top here you have, there it is. You have something that we've measured. This is the question whether your job security is good, which we got from the CCHS, which Peter said wasn't a very good question. But the COPSOQ 3 also has questions about employment insecurity, whether you're able to find a new job if you lost it, or what I call job instability, whether your job could change, whether additional tasks could be put on you, or you could be placed in a different department doing different things. And we've broken it down by economic sector, so you can see which sector is affected most by which of these factors. And then we've combined these three into a precarity score. And then we also have questions about the workplace itself, whether people think the workplace has enough resources or adequate staffing to do the job the way it should be done. So what you can see here is for each row or column, for each column we have broken down by color the sector that has the worst score and the best score. The best score would be the darkest green, and the worst score would be the darkest red. So for employment security, mining had the highest insecurity, and public administration had the most secure. For employment insecurity, asking different questions, you get a bit different. answers, and here education and healthcare had less worries about trying to find a new job if they lost their job. And job instability is highest for IT. And you were pointing out transportation?
I would just say it's very consistent. It's all mediocre.
Yeah. Well, wait till you see it in the next few slides. Now, it's also interesting to see that manufacture or construction has the best scores for having enough resources and adequate staffing, and the areas where it's worst is educational service, healthcare, arts and entertainment, and accommodation and food services. So it gives you a bit of flavor for the differences between the economic sectors. We also were told when we piloted the survey that you're missing the stress that's associated in working with dangerous or suboptimal conditions. So we have a number of questions, 10 different aspects of the health and safety environment, such this one is safety hazards, and then we have a list of examples. And we ask people whether it's well designed and controlled, present but not usually an issue, or causes concern, annoyance, or actually interferes with the ability to get the job done, or if the question is not applicable at all. So this gives a bit of a flavor between the different sectors, what health and safety concerns are. So for instance, for radiation, radiation is a concern for mining, it's a concern for transportation and housing. I was telling you transportation was going to get worse. And also for healthcare and social assistance, and for IT. If you're in the financial, insurance, and real estate, you're not worried about radiation. Actually, you're not worried about hardly anything if you look across here. But again, you can see the different factors. Physical factors, which is lighting and noise, thermal comfort, air quality, kind of go together. And this rather odd-named economic sector, administrative support and waste management, remedial services, includes call centers. And so I'm not sure how that fits in there, but also arts and entertainment, you see a lot of ergonomics, physical factors, etc. And accommodation and food services, the safety and working alone is a big factor. So if we add all these 10 up into one score, we see that transportation and warehousing is the one with the highest reported hazards, and again the finance and real estate, etc., with the lowest. Now if we look at work demands, we're going to include these three questions along with work-life conflict. We see that, just as Peter said, while all three of these may be work demands, they do measure different things, because you can see that, for instance, the highest with quantitative demands is the IT group, yet the highest with emotional demands is healthcare and social assistance, whereas the highest with work pace is food and accommodation services. So you can see how all these three, you can lump them together, but they do measure separate things too. And the work-life conflict, the sector that has the most there is the IT, and the least is utilities. We have a bit of a problem with the utilities group, because in French, the way we said utilities, which was the way Statistics Canada called utilities, people thought it was public administration. And so there's a number of French public administration people who are in utilities. So, and you can see that public administration is a bit better. Now we look at work organization. We have influence, possibilities of development, meaning of work, and commitment to the workplace. And here again, you'll see a theme that's recurrent, that transportation and warehousing is in rough shape when it comes to these factors. Educational services, meaning of work, and healthcare, which makes sense because these people are very dedicated to teaching people and helping people learn new things. When it comes to possibilities for development, professional, scientific, and technical services, I guess that's me. Educational services also has possibilities for development. Influence, we see a problem here with healthcare and educational services again. Here we're talking about work organization, and yet while you have strengths in one factor, you may not have strengths in all the factors. And then overall, we see that construction for work organization has probably one of the strongest, along with mining. When it comes to relationships, predictability is being informed about what's going on, recognition, role clarity, leadership, supervisor support. Again, the theme of transportation. Utilities, role clarity. Again, we're not sure how much of this utilities could also be public administration in Quebec. Food and accommodation services, surprisingly, given some of the tough position they were in, some of the other factors, is very good with these factors, and overall is the best with the relationships. Again, educational services and healthcare are having a rough time with some of the relationships, as is manufacturing and utilities. And we talk about work values, trust, vertical trust, and justice and respect. And I think in Europe sometimes they refer that to as social capital. And here again we have transportation again. Food and accommodation again works out quite well, and public administration is one of the worst. And some of the symptoms, who are most symptomatic, and we had 4 questions each of 5 different symptoms: stress symptoms, burnout, sleep troubles, somatic symptoms, and cognitive symptoms. And here again, mining was one of the highest symptomatic, also the retail trade. High symptom issues. Self-rated health, although it seems like a simple question, how would you rate your health? It's been shown epidemiologically to be a very strong predictor of very serious things, such as mortality and other serious health conditions. Burnout, food and accommodation service, and the retail trade, stress again. Cognitive symptoms, IT. I know when I try to work with computers, I end up with cognitive problems. And the call center people, again. And finally, I'll deal with offensive behaviors, and I'd like to dig into this a bit more because we've had a lot of attention recently on these types of things. So this is a very complicated slide, and maybe I'll just... Sorry about that. So, undesired sexual attention, you can see that we're ranging from somewhere a low in manufacturing of 7% to a high of 21% in the retail trade. And I've added the reference levels from Denmark at the bottom, and you can see that it's 2.9%, and there is no economic sector that's anywhere close to the Danish levels. Then we have threats of violence, the high being healthcare and social assistance, and the call center people. Transportation and warehousing is one of the highest. The lowest being the professional, scientific, and technical. And again, the finance and real estate. Denmark is 7.8%, so there's a couple sectors that are lower, but almost all of the other ones are well above. Physical violence, again, the highest is in healthcare, which is almost a contradiction in people are caring for people and experiencing that much violence. Followed by educational services, which we hear a lot about, the violence in schools, and the wholesale trade, and I'm not too sure about that. Again, professional and technical services has the least amount, and it's the only one that's less than the Danish average of about 4%. Now, bullying was quite interesting. We were quite shocked to see in the mining sector, 46% of the respondents from the mining sector said that they had experienced bullying in the last year. And there's a definition of what bullying is. And you can see the least is in agriculture, 21%, and again, the real estate people. But when you compare it to Denmark, 8%, it really stresses the difference between the cultures. And I talked to one of the Tage Christensen to ask whether this number was taken in 2006? Yes. Six? So I asked him if any of the recent surveys, and he said it's about 11% now. But when I talked to Hanna and some of her surveys, she was much lower than 10% in Sweden, and Germany also had very low levels. However, Spain and France were similar to the Canadian. Discrimination, this isn't in the COPSOQ. This is a question that we added, so there's no comparison here. But public administration, the highest, and utilities, or professional and technical, the lowest. And then vicarious behaviors. Any one of these 5 behaviors where you're not the victim, but you're witnessing it in the workplace. And here, educational service, healthcare, and arts and entertainment, food and accommodations were very high, along with wholesale trade and mining. Then we also asked the question whether the violence and harassment policy was effective. And you can see that it's fairly similar to the vicarious, although I have seen workplaces where we see huge amounts of offensive behaviors, and yet they say the policy is working, and I can't get my head around why that is. So we thought we'd break it down a bit, the offensive behaviors by different factors, and this is by age. Now, less than 20, we had less than 20 people that were less than 20. So this is very precarious statistically, and that's why the little asterisk there. But it was surprising, the undesired sexual attention from that group is extremely high, and you can see it fall off as age. And I won't comment as to why. It is discrimination. It's all discrimination. It's also ageism. Threats of violence were also a bit higher in this age group than all the other ones. And Sandra Moll is in the audience, and she's done quite a bit of studies in this age group here. And if you want to talk to her about some of this. We also took, people can experience more than one offensive behavior at a time. So what we did is now we looked at any offensive behavior. And remember, we only have very few people in this category. But you can see that when you add it all together, there seems to be fairly consistent across, although there is a little bump in the middle. What we saw consistently, too, is that the older age group, it's almost like people who are fed up with this type of thing leave, and those who who survive actually can put up with it, and that's just my reading of it. So if we broke it down by gender, I expected a bigger difference here, but the difference is significant. You'll notice that for every offensive behavior, it's reported by women more often than by men. But some of them are not that different, threats of violence and physical violence, and some are quite different, bullying and vicarious offensive behaviors. When we broke it down by occupation, you notice that sales and service workers have a much higher rate of undesired sexual attention than most other groups, and the lowest is in the craft and trade-related workers. A similar pattern here, physical violence. Again, the craft and related workers are low, and sales and service are high. But it's interesting to see that physical violence amongst professionals, this includes nurses, teachers, etc., are the second highest. Then we took it by language. We thought this was interesting. I put the Danish in here again. You can see how much lower it is. But what was interesting is that the French, the blue, was much lower than the English-speaking. English-speaking, for instance, for bullying was 34%, but largely it was French-speaking Quebec was 20%. So we thought, again, the effect of culture on this. So in conclusion, the EKOS dataset, as Peter stressed, is a major survey of psychosocial conditions in Canadian workplaces, and it's one of the few, if not the only. As such, it represents a representative peek at which aspects of the psychosocial environment at work are associated with the symptoms that we've measured. It also represents a comprehensive survey of the prevalence of offensive behaviors in Canadian workplace. And a preliminary review of the different factors affecting psychosocial conditions indicates that differences across economic sectors are pronounced, implying that interventions can be targeted by economic sector. And with that, are there any questions or comments? Yes?
So I'm an educational assistant, so I would be in the education sector. So I was really surprised at some of those results. And I guess maybe I need to understand more who gave you, who was filling out these questionnaires. Because I know in 2016, lost time due to violence, 25% of that was in the education sector, 75% was everywhere else, and of that 25%, 17% is with educational assistants. So I'm just wondering who got to, you know, respond to the questionnaire, and I'm really surprised at some of the colorings in the graphs.
Okay. Well, I think when you saw the violence, the educational sector was one of the highest sectors. Right. So I think it's consistent with what you're saying. But the EKOS survey, Peter explained this a bit. They have a panel of people that they regularly ask to fill out surveys. And I think there's a total of over 50,000 Canadians. And they try to get a representative sample across Canada in all the provinces. And so we tapped into that. Now, not every one of those 50,000 will answer every survey. They're just online. They're available to do surveys. And we got a certain percentage. So it's supposed to be a cross-section of working Canadians. Okay. So, yes, Sandra?
Really interesting. And so you reported the means, but I wonder if there's standard deviation, like how much variability is in with each of those. Like I wonder if that might speak to her education piece, right? Is it quite variable in the education sector, or like the standard deviation, I guess?
Yeah, the standard deviation across the economic sectors are pretty consistent. The range, but the differences between sectors are quite significant. Yes?
Hi, I was actually curious if the offensive, you had the age group and showing the offensive behaviors, and I noticed that age group 20 to 29, it went from a very high dip, so yeah, right there, you go from below 20 to 61%, and then you look at 20 to 29, and there's that big drop in offensive behavior that starts to move right back up after that age group, and then drops off at 60 plus. So I was just curious if the data showed why that age group from 20 to 29 are, I guess, less susceptible to the offensive behavior.
You notice that little star there?
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't have many people. This is not a good representative sample of this age group, and so I wouldn't trust that. But I think here it's even more pronounced if you look at these. And again, I can't trust that this is a representative sample.
But I guess even so, if you're to take that below 20 out of the equation, then you have less offensive behavior. It looks like it peaks from 30 to 39, and then there's a downward trend again.
Yeah. Yeah, I've noticed that too, and I personally have a theory, but it's not proven. I'm wondering if these people who, like Melissa said, are starting out in their careers and they're willing to put up with a lot in order just to survive, and that once you start to get comfortable, and I still believe the theory that after 60, if you can't stand your job, you won't hang around if you have that economic option.
Actually, some people are quite tolerant. That's one factor. But the other interesting thing that you mentioned, and I was wondering if you had, just as a hypothesis, percentage of quietness that happens across industries, like a percentage of things that don't get reported. Because these are people who are willing to say something. And a friend of mine said oppression is silence. That's when you are truly oppressed, when you say nothing. So do you have a barometer? Do you have a percentage that you think might go unmentioned or that aren't represented?
Obviously, if they don't tell us, we can't report. But I understand your point. One of the reasons for doing a survey in the workplace is that it gives people an anonymous, silent way of reporting things that they would normally not be willing to expose themselves to. And we've seen more than, I remember one comment at the end of the survey saying, I'm so glad you've done the survey and I'm able to tell you these things because I haven't been feeling safe enough to say anything about them, and I feel so guilty, and so they were very thankful, as this is a way of communicating this. But in order to do that, you need to make sure that everyone in the workplace feels safe and anonymous when they're producing, and so that's why we put together the tool that we're using. Because in many workplaces, the other thing that Hannah said that I can reiterate here in Canada that we've experienced is the survey also gives labels, gives you words to deal with certain things. People said often to us that we were struggling with something and we couldn't quite put our finger on it, and you actually gave the label, and now we can deal with it better because we can talk about it, we can look for solutions because we have this new label that we can apply to what we couldn't put our finger on. It was just, oh, that's John. Something about John that just irks me, but now we know it's, John's this or John's that. But again, it's impersonal, so it's not personal.
Is there any correlation between the vicarious and advocacy, sort of, stepping in or trying to air something that you're seeing on behalf of someone else who might not say something?
We haven't looked at that, but I would imagine if you look at vicarious and looked at justice measures, we might be able to see some type of, we haven't, we just scratched the surface of this. There are so many things that can be explored. It's just finding the questions to answer. And thank you for this. Yes?
I'm curious about whether you have age distribution across different sectors and how that could play into this. Because like undesired sexual attention, a lot of that was in retail, which I imagine would have a lot of the under 20 group.
Yeah.
And then bullying was really like mining. I don't know what age distribution.
Yeah, the proper way to do this would be to build a multi-level, multi-variable model, this type of thing that Peter does, and then let all the factors come in and see which ones are most predominant. I did have another slide which Peter suggested I leave out, which showed how much of the difference was associated by age, by economic sector, by job, by gender, etc. And the biggest factor, and that's why I spent so much time on it, was the economic sector. It was more than job, it was more than gender, it was more than age. And so, yeah, you have the right intuition. Yeah.
I'm just going to add to that. I think it's one thing to adjust for age, but to explain it away and say, well, it's not a problem, it's just an age thing, I think is the right approach. And so I do think there's a lot to be going for the crude estimates, because regardless of whether it's because of the work they do or because they're young, it still needs to be fixed.
Oh, absolutely. I was just wondering if that would be part of this, seeing the up and down
Potentially.
Yeah, I think that's why Peter asked me to leave that slide out. Yes, Hannah.
Yes, I also want to add to this because actually I have an opportunity in my days to go into around 1,000 people working in the same organizations but in different groups in different 3 or 4 levels. And we can actually see this is not just about being a social worker, this is very much about how the work environment is. So often when I'm out, I'm saying that the offensive behaviors is the top of the iceberg. I like it, but it is the top of the iceberg. That is what we see, that is a symptom. But the organizational issues is below. But also, so this is not just about occupation, sector, or age. This is very much about the working environment and social. But I think we should go deeper into business and analysis of this.
Yes. And just as a side point, personal observations, last summer I went to Denmark because my daughter was there. And I was really surprised because I knew about these differences, so I was kind of looking around saying, what's different here? And it was, people arrive at 9:15 for their work and they leave at 4 o'clock. We didn't see the workaholics that we see here. And driving, I always think that the way people drive in a nation tells you a lot about them. And everybody, I didn't see any aggressive driving. We were driving on the highway. If you passed, you went over and then you went back again, and it was very neat. And even in McDonald's, we parked to go into McDonald's, and when we came out, there was a lady there about to give me a ticket, and I said, well, there's a little dial on your windshield, and you have to put the time that you arrived there, even at McDonald's, and you have 2 hours or whatever. And she said, in Denmark, we have rules for everything. But the thing is that people respect them and appreciate them, and it was quite a... I thought it gave me a little bit of a glimpse how things can be different if your culture values different things. If instead of competitiveness and aggression, you appreciate working together and solving problems together, it gives you a different flavor in the workplace. Am I over? Yeah. Okay, sorry.